No, I can see the screen. Yeah, you can see. When somebody put your hand up, give me a well nudge, please. Good morning and welcome to the People Overview Committee. Before we start, I need to inform you that this meeting is being live streamed and recorded. Could I have apologies, please, Ashley?
Yes, we've had apologies from Sian Lyons and also Councillor David Evans.
Thank you. Do we have any disclosable pecuniary interest? No. The minutes of the meeting held on the 29th of September. Sorry, Hilary.
I just need to say that I do run a children's nursery, so I know we're discussing education a bit today, so I just wanted to mention that. I wasn't sure if that would be included.
Okay, thank you. Roger, you wanted to make a comment about the minutes, didn't you? You're muted down.
Thanks, Peggy. Sorry, I had a job on muting. Can you hear me now?
Yes, fine, thank you.
Fine. Yes, please, Chairman. There was a comment made during the meeting thanking Karen Bradshaw for her service, and I noticed that it wasn't in the minutes. There were a number of councillors there, and it was just a general comment, really. I think it would be worth, for me anyway, can I suggest that the minutes record that a vote of thanks was given to Karen Bradshaw for her many years of service, both to this committee and to Shropshire Council. And I just thought it would be nice to have that recorded in the minutes. Thank you.
Yes, that's fine. That's fine. Everybody else okay with the minutes? Public question time, we have none. And members' question time, we have none. So we'll go to item 6, school place planning, and Phil Wilson will be presenting.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Chair. Good morning, Committee. My name's, for those of you who don't recognise me, my name's Phil Wilson. I'm Service Manager for Business Support within Learning Skills as part of the People's Directorate. I came to the last People Overview Committee to talk about school place planning, and I was asked to attend this one to pick up on one particular theme, which is about the school rebuilding programme. It's really an update because we've got 2 Shropshire schools are part of that programme, so I was asked to come back to the committee and just give you an overview in terms of the school rebuilding programme. So I'll give you a little bit of background so that we're all familiar with what the programme is about. So this is a 10-year capital programme which was announced by Prime Minister in June 2020. So if you just think about the timing, that's probably around the time when it might have slipped under the radar a little bit when we were kind of just getting in the early months of the pandemic. So announcement by the Prime Minister in June regarding this 10-year capital programme. Further details then followed 8 months later with the Secretary of State when more details were provided. And what they did in that announcement, they also announced the first 50 schools who will be part of the programme. They named those schools. 6 months later, in July 2021, the next 50 school projects were announced. The focus of the programme is a large-scale rebuilding and refurbishment programme targeted at the highest need school buildings in England. The aim is, over 10 years, is to identify and replace or significantly refurbish the 500 poorest condition school buildings in England. The first 100 schools, as I've just indicated, were selected. They were primarily selected because one of the first criteria is about the buildings were of a specific construction type that required replacement, or because their buildings were of a highest condition need. And this has been identified through the Department for Education's condition data collection. So what they've effectively done is they have surveyed all of the schools, state-funded schools, and from that analysis and these condition data collection, they've identified from those assessments the schools that are in the poorest condition and in greatest need of significant investment. underwriting all of this school rebuilding program is a strong net zero carbon initiative in terms of they're looking for these new school buildings to have a very small carbon footprint, and so they'll be built to the highest possible standards regarding the carbon neutrality, but it will be following DFE specifications. So Shropshire's fortunate to have 2 schools in the first 100 schools nationally, which so there's 2 ways you can look at that. That's very good insofar as we're recognising it, or that we've got schools in a condition that requires that. But I'm looking at the former. Belvedere Secondary School in Shrewsbury was in the first phase. And then we've got St Andrew's CE Primary School in Schiffnel is in the second phase. So we've got 2 schools in the first 100 schools. So if I just give you a little bit of background to Belvedere School. This one was actually prioritised because of that element I told you about the building methods that have been used to build that school. The school has part of the buildings were built in what they called an integrated building. It's a construction technique which involved precast beams and slabs, and that's been identified by the department as those schools who qualify that, and there's several across the country, that was one of the priorities in terms of replacing. So that's why Belvedere was on the list. The school's an academy, so again, the dialogue and the conversations and the detailed conversations have been between the Department for Education. They've worked directly with the school, and hopefully you'll be familiar that the school is part of the Central Shropshire Academy Trust. So clearly the trust have been involved as well in those conversations. The local authority has been there involved in terms of highways planning and education, so we have had input from officers. But the key elements of the project planning has been between the Department for Education and the school. Members may well be aware that the planning application for this project was considered and approved by the Northern Planning Committee on the 31st of August this year. I called the project leads at the Department for Education yesterday, because I was coming here today just to give you an update in terms of where they are. I've been advised that the contracts with the preferred contractor are ready, and so the department's going through the final stages of due diligence process to complete that. My understanding is that if all of that is sorted out in the coming weeks, that we could be having the contractor could be on site for the initial groundworks probably early in the new year. This is a 12-month build, so I'm not clear in my own mind in terms of when the build will start, possibly next summer, possibly autumn. This is, and if you just think about it, this is a building a 12-month contract that's happening on a build that's happening on the site that's existing and operating as a school in the period. If you're able to look at the planning application, you'll see the school is being completely relocated. So they are able to build the school while keeping the main school operational. So the 12-month build will build the new school. The students will then move over to the new school, and then the department will take another 12 months dealing with the residual building, the demolition, clearance and landscaping of the site of the existing school. So we'll probably talk about a 24-month project in total. Again, we're talking again, I pushed them, we're talking about a £20 million investment in a completely new school. So that's a significant investment for education provision in the Shrewsbury area. And maybe just take an opportunity to just put it in the context of what else is happening in school rebuilding and school place planning. It's good news because you'll be aware that we've got the project at Millbrace School, a new classroom block there. We've got the significant works at Horman Federation site on Featherbed Lane. We're expanding both the infants and the junior schools there. We also then in the pipeline, we've got a new special school and a new primary mainstream school being built in Bowbrook for hopefully September 23. And also, once we vacate the Sundorne infant site in Crescent in Sundorne, the department is then investing significant capital works on the Shrewsbury Academy site. They'll be consolidating all of their provision on the Bowbrook site. So I'm not aware of any precedent in my time of working at Shropshire Council that we've had so much investment in Shropshire education. So I think it's a significant capital investment in our schools, providing modern, effective educational environments for our learners across all phases, because it'll go through from early years, primary and into secondary, is something to be celebrated and applauded. So significant investment going into our education provision in Shrewsbury. The second
Can I
project
just
then,
ask you before you go up, where you're having the school relocated, what about their sports facilities? Will it affect, is it going on fields where they've had sport?
so this is the Shrewsbury Academy.
No, Belvedere, sorry. Because that's,
Belvedere, yes, well, I think they've had to get Sport England will have been as part of the planning process.
Oh, okay.
So I do think they've got sufficient grounds to continue with the outdoor education. So we'll be clearly partly on the playing field, the new build, but I'm led to believe there's sufficient play area for the students to continue to enjoy their sporting
okay,
education.
thanks.
Okay. The second project then is for St Andrews CE Primary School in Schiffnel. This is a maintained school, so Shropshire Council is what they call the responsible body. So the department will be working with Shropshire Council, but we'll also be working closely with the school. And this is a church school, so the Diocese of Lichfield are heavily involved in this as well. So they're a key stakeholder. We're in very early days on this particular project because we were only notified that the project is on the programme this summer. So it's very early days. What we've been carrying out since we had that notification is we've had pre-feasibility phase, which has involved a series of on-site meetings with DFE project leads, their technical advisors and school leaders. And that's really just having a look at the site, initial look at the site and scoping the overall project. So we're beginning to get an idea about how the project will play out. But it's a bit similar to Belvedere insofar as we were building a new school next to an existing school, so the footprint of the school would have been a different location to what the current school is. Otherwise, we couldn't do this with the students still in place. Feasibility works, which will take up to 24 weeks, were initiated last month. So that'll take us through to probably February time. That will involve a wide range of surveys, which will be ground investigation, environmental works, archaeological contamination, boreholes will be drilled, all those sorts of things you would expect. So there's a clear understanding of the whole site, which will inform where the footprint of the building will be as well. So all that work is underway. So technical advisors, I believe, actually are on the site as we speak. At the end of the feasibility phase, so we're probably talking mid-spring, a control option will be built, effectively a plan and a footprint of where the building will be and and what will be in with the building. So that will be worked on in the early summer. And the scale and the size of the works. And so it's really important to understand this is called the school rebuilding program, but it could be a complete rebuild or it could be a significant refurbishment. We don't know that yet until all the feasibility works are undertaken. Interestingly on this though, this school has got 12 classes. It's not quite 2 forms of entry, but this project will see it built as a 2-form entry primary school. So we will have 2 additional class spaces, which is really, really helpful because in school-based planning terms, we have pressure on places in Schiffnel. So part of this project will allow us to get 2 additional class spaces into the school, which will meet our forecast requirements for additional capacity in primary provision in Schiffnel. So that's really, really helpful from our perspective. So it's very early days, so there's not much more I can really report to the committee over and above that. We're looking at a target completion date around March, Easter 2024. So a few years down the line. So it's a long project, a lot of lead in. So that's where we currently are on that project. So if you can do your maths, 500 projects nationally, the first 100 are announced. So there's still another 400 projects that the government is going to support. Now, what we've had is a top-down approach. They've used the condition collection data to inform that, but there is a consultation which was just ran over between September and October. The government is actually seeking a steer in terms of how they release and secure the places for additional schools. So rather than do top-down, it could be that we're in a scenario here where one of the approaches they're talking about is responsible bodies like local authorities and academies to propose schools that go onto the list. So there will be an opportunity if the consultation pans out in the way that it possibly suggested. One of the approaches is that local authorities will be able to nominate. And the reality is actually if we had been given the opportunity to put forward a primary school to be part of this project, we probably would not have selected St Andrews and Schiffnel. It's just one of those things. So,
Yeah.
So I would like to think we may well have a possibility in the future that we may well be able to put forward schools that we believe would benefit greatly from significant refurbishment. So
You've got your list ready.
I'm working with Property Services Group on that. We will have a list ready to go if and when that is the way the government looks to do that. So that's where we are. I was asked to provide an update, and hopefully that's given you a full appreciation of where we are. I'm very happy to take any questions.
Everybody happy? So I was waiting for Ruth's hand to move there. I thought she was going to put her hand up. Thank you, Phil. That is good news.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Pleased to say we're building 2 new ones at Tilstock as well, 2 new classrooms.
Excellent.
With so many more children there, we need them. Right, is it me? No, it's Nathan. No, it's Nathan. Is that open online?
Nathan Bolton.
Over to you, Nathan.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, all. My name is Nathan Jones. I am Service Manager for the SEND service. I've been asked to attend today, present a paper and an update for the People's Overview Committee regarding schools exclusions here in Shropshire. This paper provides details of the levels of permanent exclusions in Shropshire and how this compares to the national rates of exclusions. It informs scrutiny about the challenges faced by educators and the local authority and the cost and impact of permanent exclusions on children and the system. The rate of exclusions in Shropshire has increased steadily since 2012, see the table at 6.4, a trend that continued until schools were closed due to the COVID-19 pandemic in March 2020. Most exclusions are applied in secondary schools. There is an increase in both fixed term and permanent exclusions, and a particular concern are the number of children with special educational needs who are now being excluded at a higher rate than the national average. In 2019-20, the rate of permanent exclusions was 0.08, down from 0.16 in 2018-19 due to lockdowns, but which is still higher than the national figures. In the academic year 2020-21, despite further periods of lockdown, where schools were only open to vulnerable key working children, the local authority was notified of 75 permanent exclusions. 24 of these were averted by the local authority inclusion team, 7 were rescinded and 1 was overturned on appeal to the Pupil Disciplinary Committee. This left 43 completed permanent exclusions, of which 19 were of pupils in Key Stage 4. The risk and impact of exclusions. The Department of Education guidance states that permanent exclusion should only be used as a last resort in response to a serious breach of persistent breaches of the school's behaviour policy, where allowing the pupil to remain in school would seriously harm the educational welfare of the pupil or others in the school. Besides the immediate significant financial cost of permanent exclusions to the local authority in carrying out its duties regarding to 6-day provision, the impacts on the life chances and future financial burden on the wider welfare system cannot be ignored. Children who have been excluded often do not reach their potential in terms of obtaining good qualifications and securing good employment opportunities. Children who are considered vulnerable are more likely to be excluded, and there is clear evidence of link between safeguarding and exclusions. An audit of all 24 children who were permanently excluded in the autumn term 2020 was undertaken with a focus on adverse childhood experience. Of these 24, 58% of pupils who were permanently excluded during the scoping period were impacted by adverse childhood experience. Appendix B gives a full illustration of this work. Children who are excluded are also more at risk from all forms of exploitation and abuse sources rather than their primary caregivers. For permanent exclusions, the local authority must arrange suitable full-time education for the pupil to begin no later than the 6th school day of the exclusion. The cost of educating permanently excluded pupils to the local authority have ranged from £2,200 and up to £39,200 per pupil. In 2018-19, the cost of providing for the needs of the 90 children who were permanently excluded totaled £302,000. These are costs beyond those which would ordinarily be spent on children's education. The causes of exclusion are varied and complex, and work continues to understand the factors contributing to the increase in numbers over a relatively short period of time. The following factors have had an impact on exclusion rates. Steady reduction in retained local authority funding over a number of years, leading to restructuring of central support service with a focus on statutory duties and targeted support of the previous universal offer. Conversion to academy status, changing the lines of accountability for schools. Continued cost pressure on Shropshire schools and retained local authority education budgets. Emerging contextual safeguarding issues with criminal exploitation, county lines, gaining a foothold in parts of Shropshire. Increasing complex needs and issues around mental health and well-being. Use of social media causing issues in schools. Changing curriculum with a focus on exams. And capacity within the tuition, medical and behavioural support services in Shropshire. Work streams are in place to focus on inclusion and reducing levels of exclusion, and its purpose is to review approaches, processes and provision, and services to ensure that all Shropshire children and young people, including those with special educational needs and or disabilities, have access to a suitable full-time education, and to reduce the level of fixed term and permanent exclusions experienced by children in Shropshire. Other work currently underway includes a review of the Tnbss primary model has been completed, and a new model of delivery is to be implemented from January 2022. The draft community inclusion policy is currently at the consultation stage. Since the Shropshire Safeguarding Community Partnership SSCP pathway was revised in 2019, we have seen a significant increase in the number of children who are identified with risk factors pertaining to exploitation, and there is a clear link between children who are excluded from school and increasing risk factors around exploitation. See Appendix C for further detail. Operation Encompass is successful in achieving its aims of notifying educational establishments of domestic abuse incidents so that they are able to understand and support children in schools. The inclusion team attend pupil planning meetings to support children and advise schools with regard to behaviour management and referral pathways. Officers attend pupil disciplinary committee meetings routinely. Promoting and using centred approaches and one-page profiles. The EAS team leader participates in weekly exploitation and missing triage meetings. Education is fully represented on the Serious Organised Crime Joint Area Group. There is a well-specialist placement panel and a successful development and implementation of a fair access panel. School performance monitoring cycle measures schools according to their inclusive practice and levels of exclusion. Planned work that will be undertaken will be the development of a management process and protocol, further review of the Tnbss model of delivery and sick day provision in order to increase capacity in the system, continuing to work with schools on cultural change so that in Shropshire children belong to everyone and they are able to access the right provision at the right time, to provide appropriate support around behaviour management, address waiting lists for schools, address waiting lists for services and increase staff capacity, develop training offers to schools. LA will also ensure schools governors receive training on how they can help shape their school's ethos and the consideration for reinstating behaviour advisors and behavioural support teams. In conclusion, in order to turn the tide of permanent exclusions, partners must build on the work to create a fully inclusive community that understands the factors driving behaviour in schools. Behaviour is always a form of communication which we must hear, act upon, and provide the necessary response and resources to adequately and fully meet the needs of our children and young people. This is more important than ever as we also begin to understand the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic and deal with its aftermath. It is also firmly in the interest of Shropshire to invest in our children's future to ensure the stability and growth of our communities and wider societies as we face the challenges to come. Thank you. If I can open up to any questions now, please.
Thank you. Can I ask you, has the children at school had a big effect on them actually coming back?
Sorry, I'm really struggling to hear the question. My apologies.
After the children being away from school for so long with COVID, not with it, but as a result of it, has that had a big impact on them coming back, on their behaviour, etc.?
I think for some young people that is certainly the case. So as part of the support package, we have been provided some funds. And I know that our EP service is working with schools to provide that support, but inevitably being away from school and those social opportunities for a long period of time for some young people is going to have an impact, yes. Of course, many vulnerable young people continue to access education during the lockdown period, but of course, going from a relatively small and quiet environment where many young people weren't here when schools started proper, all young people returned, that would have had an impact, yes.
Can I ask, I was a school governor and I have been on board when children were excluded, but governors don't get any training towards that. I think that is something that, you know, really could be looked at, because you accept what the school says to you. I mean, yes, you do query, but you know, for new governors, it's a bit of an ordeal sitting there when you've got parents in front of you. I think it's something we could look at.
Absolutely, and I'm sure in the paper it alludes to the fact that there would be some training in place for governors. Part of that was around changing culture and ethos, but I think it's important that governors are supported to really understand their role within those exclusion panel process, so we can definitely take that away.
Thank you. Right. Okay.
Come on, yeah. Yeah, I think it's important just to point out to people who may be listening that governors do get training, but not on this particular, you know, not on exclusions. So I think people said to me in the past, our governor training actually is very good, but you know, because of the COVID and the, you know, the increase in exclusions, and the reluctance of people sometimes to become governors, you know, there is a little area where we do need to do some training. So it's just a little bit as opposed to the whole thing. That's all I want to say. Thank you.
Sure.
Hear me, no? No.
No.
Nathan hear me then?
If you put your mic on.
This on.
This on.
Kirsty, sorry, did you want to come in?
Right,
Okay.
I've just got another question for you.
Okay.
Thank you for the presentation. I think it's a bit of an understatement to say that the exclusions have been steady as they doubled in 3 years. I asked the previous executive director of people what was the safety net for young people that had been excluded and not been able to get into Tnbss. And I was told quite honestly there wasn't one. But Tnbss should be the safety net. And if we can catch these children, then although we talk about how expensive it is, we would be making savings in the future with, you know, you mentioned yourself, children are exploited. We'd be making savings probably as far as crime is concerned and unemployment. We've now got a Tnbss, new model of the Tnbss, and I know the head of the Tnbss has been asking for a long time for help, and to be honest hasn't received it. So could you give us a description of the new Tnbss and how much finance is going to be involved, extra money is going to be invested in the Tnbss?
Steve?
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. If first of all, I'll give a very brief overview of the new Tnbss model, and then I can also talk about 6-day provision. The model that's been introduced from January is a revision to the primary aged pupils model. At the moment, the pupils attend the Tnbss for half a day and spend half a day in their primary schools, and they do that for 5 days. From January, the change is going to be that within any week, the children attend Tnbss for 4 half days, and on the 5th day, Tnbss go and work with school staff and support that reintegration. Because I think we probably all agree that the important thing is when pupils face these challenges, reintegrating them into their mainstream schools is one of the most effective ways of supporting them in their future lives. So there'll be that change in that model. So pupils will attend for 4 half days, and on the 5th day, Tnbss will do that intervention and support work in the host schools. In terms of 6-day provision, not all 6-day provision is provided by Tnbss. The bulk of it is, but as colleagues have quite rightly said, we reach a point sometimes where Tnbss is full. So for the pupils where it is appropriate, they would undertake a different 6-day provision. And I think in the report it lists some of those in one of the appendixes. Some of that is the provision of tutoring. Some of it is the attendance at alternative provision. We've got other things which are in the pipeline, which are important to flag up. We have the new SEND free school due to open in Shrewsbury, and the opening of such things will help to alleviate some of the pressures on organisations such as Tnbss. So, for example, Tnbss has seen quite an increase in pupils who have anxiety issues, and many of those children might be suitable for moving on to the new free school. So there are actions in place which will alleviate some of those pressures. I'll pause there and just see if there's any follow-up questions.
Thank you for that. So basically, it doesn't seem as though there's going to be any extra financial investment in the Tnbss, but we have, when I talk to the head there, we have people that he desperately wants to get into Tnbss because that's the place they should be, and we're just not investing. Therefore, he can't take any extra pupils in. And in the past, I believe that's ended with disastrous consequences. I see the Tnbss as a jewel. I see it as extremely important, and it needs the investment to do the job that it needs to do. And there doesn't seem to be, and I understand there's restraints, but there doesn't seem to be any enthusiasm to put that money in there and listen to the guy that's asking for it.
Quite happy to come back on some of that, Councillor Pardy, and I would agree that Tnbss is certainly a jewel and something we should be proud of, and has had fantastic results in intervention in children's lives. In terms of capacity, some of the capacity issue relates to the physical buildings and the speed in which Tnbss are able to integrate children. Obviously, there are some very complex needs of children in Tnbss, and so when we have a child needing a place, it goes through a very defined plan of integrating them. Probably one of the bigger issues around capacity is not the numbers of places at Tnbss, but actually how we move children on from Tnbss so that it's freeing up places within the service. And I suppose there's a slight analogy there around bed blocking in NHS. You know, if we can move children onto the correct places, then that's how we can solve some of the capacity issues. And I think the introduction of things such as the new free school will help to aid that as well.
Thank you.
Kirsty, you wanted to come back before? Sorry, I've missed you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, there's just a couple of points. You know, Nathan will probably support me on this, that there's a lot of work going on the local authority SEND partnership board that we're doing around supporting schools, and Steve, you'll know this as well. We're looking at more, you know, joined up approach with our healthcare workers and support workers within school and the school setting, and there's a lot of work being done on that. I know that was raised on point 6.2. The other thing, very briefly to touch on, is the adverse childhood experiences. On my health and wellbeing board, we have prioritised this. I've done the workshop training. I think Tanya's in the room. She's been involved in it. It's something that people really want to get behind. It works when you understand how that affects the young person. Really powerfully, it's very much, it's not you, it's what's happened to you. And when a child can understand that and be supported, there are great outcomes. So there is a lot of work behind the scenes going on at how we can support not you know, children that when you look at the 43 that were left with the total, let's break that down and look at the support, long-term outcomes, and get the best for our young people in Shropshire. Thank you. The other thing, very briefly, is the child exploitation work. Amy's done the directorate, hasn't she, Steve and Nathan? There's a lot of support for schools, networking now for that. And the development of trees together, you know, the linking up approach seems to be going forward how we are going to really tackle this, and it's really pleasing to see. I know Nathan will know more of this, but and Steve, but you know, that is the only way we're going to do it. That's what we're trying to do and striving for. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Wilde.
Thank you. I was just going to ask, when Steve does perhaps a fuller reply, about the investment that's been made with Tnbss, because there are more places available, I understand.
I'll come back in there, but the commissioning of places at Tnbss is not the area I'm responsible, so it's not necessarily an area I feel able to comment on at the moment. But if I digress slightly and just pick up on one of the points which Kirsty just introduced, the other thing which we're very well aware of, that due to changes nationally, and it's alluded to in the report around changes in personnel, that there has developed a gap within support for teachers developing strategies to cope with behaviours in school. So we've undertaken a piece of work where we're starting to work with a range of stakeholders, which would include Tnbss, would include Woodlands, would include our teaching schools, to look at what support we can put in place for teachers in school. That might be an outreach model for individual children, but equally we know that one of the weaker areas for schools at the moment is that provision of support for teachers in coping with behaviours in the classroom. And as somebody mentioned earlier, part relates to the return from COVID and the pandemic, you know, helping children settle back into routines. So I think hopefully we're painting a picture that we're not complacent and we're not sitting on our laurels. We are trying to put things in place to further support schools and to make sure that, you know, where places are needed in Tnbss, we're making places available in Tnbss as we can. But I'm afraid I can't really comment on the commissioning aspect at Tnbss.
Councillor Horton.
Thank you, Chair. 2 questions, if I may. In the report at 7.9.
Ruth, you might need to get the mic a bit closer so they can. Nathan's having trouble hearing you.
Can you hear me?
Can you hear Nathan?
Yes, thank you.
2 questions, if I may, Chair. In the report at 7.9, it makes reference to combating schools who persistently exclude or off-roll. Is that a problem in Shropshire with specific schools with higher exclusion rates? And if so, what support is given to those schools and training for their staff?
Yes, it's my understanding that, yes, it is some specific schools that exclude more than others, and that is picked up through, we have a biannual meeting where we review performances of schools across the system, and then it's down to the school improvement team who will challenge those schools and work with them to look at how they can improve their practice and understand some of the trends that are driving that as well. Steve, would you like to add anything in that?
Thank you, Nathan. Excuse me. In Shropshire, we have our annual conversation with Ofsted, and one of the questions that will be asked is there off-rolling within Shropshire? We have no evidence of off-rolling in Shropshire. We do not believe that off-rolling is a significant issue in Shropshire. Likewise, we do not believe that permanent exclusion is being misused. The permanent exclusions that tend to happen are a long fit with the guidelines. What we are probably saying is that there'll be alternatives to the permanent exclusions that happen. As Nathan has alluded to, we have a process which is called school performance monitoring, and this is where a range of officers from a range of different services within the council meet to identify strengths and weaknesses of all of our schools, and this is the process which we'll use to identify patterns of exclusion which might be higher than we would expect, and where we might think schools could use alternatives instead of permanent exclusions. We have a document which outlines what actions we can take, and there's some DFE guidelines around this. So what we have done in the past is we have done what we would call a calling meeting, which we would ask a school to Shire Hall and to talk us through the reasons for permanent exclusions, why we think their exclusions are higher, and maybe hold them to account. Likewise, we have my team of the school improvement advisors who would visit schools, we visit all schools, and we would pick up in those conversations patterns and trends around permanent exclusions.
Councillor Green.
Thank you. I've got a green light here.
Can I just hang on a second? Do you want to come back on?
Yes,
what you asked?
thanks for that answer. But I did want to ask 2 questions, but I can wait. It's fine.
You're not working. Try.
All these on here are dead now, otherwise I'd give you one.
Okay. Oh,
Yes,
I'm red. Can you hear? Is that?
It's all right.
Hello? No. Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Good. Right, at 9.1, where we're going through reasons for the increasing exclusions, and you make reference to the conversion to academy status as being one of the reasons. Do you have data, both in a historical sense and in a real-time sense in comparison, on that effect? Because clearly you stated it as having that an effect.
I'm afraid I don't have the data split between academy and maintained schools as far as exclusions are concerned. When we consider secondary, I think all but one of our secondary schools are academies. So it is kind of difficult to make a contrast because, of course, most of a good proportion of our exclusions are in the secondary sector. So it's more difficult to give a kind of conclusive kind of perspective around that. But of course, the change of status and the academies working directly with the Regional Schools Commissioner does have an impact, as opposed to maintained schools who work much more closely and collaboratively with the local authority. And I'm sure Steve has his hand up, so he could give you more detail regarding that.
Thank you, Nathan. But just to echo really everything Nathan said, that all of our secondary schools, apart from one, is now an academy. And the effect is twofold. One, it affects the funding that comes into local authority for the provision of services. But two, we are funded as a local authority to work closely with our maintained schools, and we visit each of our secondary maintained schools 3 times a year, and we will have more in-depth conversations as part of that school improvement process. Our work with our academies is less frequent. So when we visit our academies, due to funding restrictions, we only visit 1 time per year, so we get less opportunity to hold those schools to account. And as Nathan's touched on, the responsibility around some of that work then is the Regional Schools Commissioner, which is Andrew Warren, who's the Regional Schools Commissioner for the West Midlands.
And is clearly then that there is an effect? Is that information being fed back to the Department for Education?
Sorry, I missed the question. Sorry, I couldn't hear.
Clearly, there is an effect. Is that information being passed back to the Department for Education?
My understanding that we have regular conversations with the Regional Schools Commissioner. So yes.
Yeah.
Ruth, you wanted to?
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thanks for the answer to the first question. I know this item is around pupils who are excluded, but I'm interested on the wider impact of those young people who still remain in school, who are not excluded, but have been subject to some of the disruptive behaviour or bullying or drug supplies, and how those people are affected and how that's addressed and monitored and how schools are supported.
I mean, I guess schools will support individual students on an individual basis, depending on the level of impact that they have to deal with. And so, yes, it does have an impact, but of course, schools will support those children. And of course, the ultimate resolution is for children to be excluded as well. So I don't have the data regarding that particular element.
Yes, thank you. I think in response to sort of a couple of the questions that have been asked, I think it's important to recognise that when concerns about children escalate, schools aren't left in isolation to deal with these by themselves. Quite often there is other issues going on for this child or young person, either within the local community, i.e. the contextual safeguarding and understanding of the child's world, or within the family home as well. It's very rarely that it's in isolation. So the vast majority of children that are excluded are already open to additional services, whether that be BU for their mental and emotional health and well-being, whether it be children's social care because of concerns around risk at home or within the community, or early help at some point. So what is really strong is the collaborative working relationship that happens between the local authority, inclusion team, children's social care, early help, schools and other partners before we get to the point of exclusion. and that's where a lot of the energy and the focus goes. So the exclusion, the majority of children is known about that's a rising kind of outcome that's likely to happen because people are already involved. And that's a really strong part of the working relationships that we have right the way across our school communities. Sometimes they happen quickly and without that sort of support going in prior to that exclusion from happening. And that's when the exclusion team work extremely swiftly and well to try and divert that from a permanent exclusion. So it is challenging, but it's not that the schools are being left to deal with these exclusion issues on their own. We don't always get in there as early as we would like to as a partnership across the system, but where we do, that's when it's most effective. And what we're trying to do is work to a planned move rather than sort of, moving just permanently excluding children, because it's such a negative outcome, particularly when there is a risk of exploitation.
Steve, have you got your hand up?
Thank you. Yes, just to build on what Sonia's just said there, Jane Parsons is in the room with us, and Jane works as part of the inclusion team. The inclusion team do some fantastic work, and one of the things specifically which they'll do, and this picks up on the point around support, is the inclusion team will do pupil planning meetings to put that support in around a particular child, to avert a perm-ex where possible, but also to make sure that if the child is remaining in the school, the actions that are needed to support that child and other children within the school. Thank you.
Did you want to come in, Jane?
Yeah, just to build on that, we do, good morning, Chair, sorry, committee. Just to build on that, yeah, we do encourage schools at the earliest opportunity to refer in to request a pupil planning meeting, and that is where there's been sort of 2-3 fixed term exclusions, and schools, are really on board with that and work really collaboratively. And around a version of permanent exclusions, as it was said in the report, that we diverted 20+ exclusions, and that was really that multi-agency collaborative approach where the decision had been made or taken to exclude, and we involved our partners in virtual school, the SEN team, external agencies such as We Are With You, social care, early help, and the school all came together to provide that sort of wraparound support for the pupil to ensure that that permanent exclusion did not happen.
Thank you. Councillor Love.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to go back, if possible, to the Tnbss. And when you were talking about the new model, you were saying that the children will be going in for half days. What happens on the other half of the days? Is the pupil then sort of left free to roam, or is there some kind of activity put in place for them?
I'm quite happy to come back on that one, Chair. No, on the Tnbss model, the children spend half a day at Tnbss and then half a day in their original school. So they remain on roll in their original school and they do half a day at each. In the current model, though, what doesn't happen is there is no support, physical support of Tnbss going with the child to Tnbss and spending time in the school, and that's the part of the new model, is on that 5th day, rather than the child do half a day at Tnbss and half a day at the original school, the child will spend the full day in their original school, and Tnbss will work with the schools that have placed children at Tnbss to support them further with the children.
Oh, thank you, that's really positive.
Councillor Wild?
Yeah, thank you. Just to sort of broaden it out a bit, really, I mean, schools exclusions, it involves lots of different people doing lots of different things. And certainly I know Cabinet have put more money into the prevention side of it, but just to give you sort of some crumbs of comfort, really, I was at a parish council meeting the other night and I met Helena, I think it's Helena Williamson, who's one of the outreach workers for the youth. She actually helped me years ago set up our local youth club. And I was really, really, you know, she came across as a very talented and committed officer who's actually getting out there amongst these children, because I think, you know, it's all very well, all these other things, but we've actually got to get out there, work with these kids. And people talked earlier about, or Ruth did, I think, about the kids who are actually at school who haven't been excluded, but they may well be taking drugs or in that particular set. And actually, I think Helen and her team, from what I've seen anyway, are actually getting out there and engaging with those kids. And that kind of work is really, really important, because actually their time spending talking to these kids, you know, it might be at the local bus stop or wherever they hang out, but actually we can stop some of these kids actually getting excluded and try and get them some help. So it's actually a very, very broad issue, and that particular element of it, I was quite impressed with the work that had been done and the people that are actually delivering. So I just want to make that point. I don't know if anyone else wants to pick up on that, Tanya or anything. Thank you.
Chair, can I just come in there, please? It's Kirsty. Thank you. Yeah, just to reiterate what Claire said, it's Helena Williams and the detached youth team, and they are already in schools looking at consequential behaviour, having a chat, building relationships, and so that's been such a positive start, and hopefully we'll see some really good stuff with young people. Thank you.
Oh yeah, sorry, Chair, just one thing she did say that I totally forgot about, which I think is a brilliant idea. Part of all this is trying to collect the data and understand what the kids think and everything. And what she did years ago when she did our youth coming cross houses, but what she's doing in the future as well is they actually get on the school buses and they talk to the kids, you know, and after school all the kids are quite jolly and they're chatting, you know, actually engaging with them. And they can actually pick up so much information by actually riding up and down on the school buses and directly engaging and getting that feedback. And I just think that's such a brilliant idea, because we can sit here and talk till we're blue, but actually that kind level of engagement with that number of kids, you know, there's 60 on a bus, 50, 60 on a bus, I think is absolutely brilliant. So I really hope that we're going to make some really good progress on that. So I forgot about that. Thank you.
Yeah. Are there any more questions? No. You want to start, Tom?
Let's come back from an earlier question. And so we have increased Tnbss by around 10 placements, and that's not at a ceiling. So if we need to increase placements, then we will do. So I just thought it was important to land that point. Thanks for raising the youth work and support, Claire, because as we tried to say this morning, it's about the whole community working around that young person and their family for them to stay in school. So we're really excited about this street youth work support, as well as the early help and prevention, additional capacity that we're building into Shropshire, across the whole of Shropshire. And Kirsty mentioned our work with the Child Exploitation Hub, which is called Trees. Together reducing and enabling exploitation in Shropshire. This is increasing both social work and family support time, as well as a specific worker for drug and alcohol to work with our young people, because that is one of the biggest issues that we've got in terms of child exploitation and drugs. If we can work with young people and work with them in the school, because the key is to keep these young people in school. So I wanted to comment at that point, Penny. Thank you.
Okay. Well, having been on a panel where children, we've had to exclude children, it's not only the child, it's the family that are there, the school feels they've let them down. So I think anything we can do as a council to keep those children where they should be is what we need to be doing. We don't have any recommendations, but I would like to have two. I'd like that we get to know that the government training has gone ahead, because I think that really is important. Those people aren't trained to do that, and I think if we could get some online training for them, that would be really good. And I'd quite like when Tnbss has put all the new programme in place, that you come back and tell us how it's gone on, please, Steve. I think we'd all like to know, wouldn't we, what the progress is.
Could we just as I made the point of it earlier, Peggy, can we just, it's exclusions training that the governors need.
Oh, yes, yes, yes.
So if we make that clear.
Because the head has to have at least 2 of them on the panel.
Yeah.
And it's upsetting.
Yeah.
You know, it really is. So. Okay, everybody okay with that?
Yeah.
Thank you all very much for attending and giving us so much information. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry. Over now to Sonia Miller to do the corporate parenting panel for us, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you for the opportunity to bring Corporate Parenting Board to scrutiny to People's Overview Committee today. This is the first time, as I understand it, that Corporate Parenting Board has been presented to People's Overview Committee. And what I propose to do, very as briefly as I can, but it is quite complex, so please do bear with me, is to set out the legal context of corporate parenting and the function of the board, to outline the framework for good practice as set out by the Local Government Association, and to cover the functioning of the current Corporate Parenting Board, and then make a couple of proposals for next steps for the People Overview Committee, so that we ensure that there is a governance and oversight of the function of the Corporate Parenting Board. So, sorry, this is not going to let me move forward. Bear with me 2 seconds. I need to try and get this up so I can move it forward. Okay. So the Children's Social Work Act in 2017 defined for the first time in law the responsibility of corporate parents to ensure as far as possible secure, nurturing and positive experiences for looked after children and young people and care leavers. It's defined what is a looked after child under that act, and is basically any child that's looked after for at least 13 weeks after their 14th birthday. At that point, we become their corporate parents, whether we share parental responsibility or not. The Act defines some corporate parenting principles, and that is in relation to our role as a council and for you as members, as individuals, in relation to corporate parenting, around acting in the best interest of children, encouraging them to express their views, wishes and feelings and ensure they're taken into account, make sure they have access to services, make sure children and young people are safe with stable home lives, relationships and education, promote high aspirations and prepare them for adulthood and independent living. So you'll be aware we currently have around 570 looked after children in Shropshire. It does go up and down sort of on a day-to-day basis. Attached to the PowerPoint that was circulated to you this morning is the Local Government Association Corporate Parenting Resource Pack. It gives a lot of information to members about their roles and responsibilities as individual members across the council, but also for making sure that the governance is in place for corporate parenting. So it defines what good practice looks like, and Councillor Judith Blake, who was the chair at the time of the Local Government Association, defined that looking after and protecting children and young people is one of the most important jobs that councils do, and when a child for whatever reason can't safely stay at home, it is up to us as a local authority to step in and give them the care, support and stability that they deserve. This isn't up to the lead member or director of children's services. We need everyone looking out for our most vulnerable and young children and young people, and every councillor has a role to play in embedding the corporate parenting principles, doing all they can to support children in care to live meaningful and fulfilling lives. So the role of the Corporate Parenting Board or panel, whichever we call it, is that as corporate parents, all councillors should seek to stay informed about children in the council's care and care leavers, and the establishment of a corporate parenting panel can provide a useful forum for regular, detailed discussions of issues and a positive link with children in care councils and other forums. Members of the corporate parenting panel can also use their position to raise awareness of the role amongst colleagues and provide support to the lead member of the children's services. The Local Government Association Resource Pack provides a framework for the corporate parenting panels to include the use of data reports, listening to children and young people, feedback from foster carers, feedback from independent reviewing officers, performance reports, and to consider key priorities that should include placement stability, health data, education attainment, proportion of care leavers in education, a whole range of other areas to look at. Performance reports should be publicly available and should be presented to a locally agreed committee, for example, the Corporate Parenting Panel, Relevant Scrutiny Committee or Cabinet. So that's one of the reasons that we're here today. So obviously our Corporate Parenting Board does have this overview and does have this oversight, but it links, by linking it into People's Overview Committee, it makes sure that we've got the transparency of that publicly available information. Corporate Parenting Board has a significant role in safeguarding, and there should be a oversight of the multi-agency response to safeguarding children looked after and care leavers, especially those who are vulnerable in respect of missing episodes, child exploitation, criminal exploitation, modern slavery, and are within the criminal justice system. And it has a role in overseeing the virtual school, and the Children and Families Act 2014 places a duty on every Children's Services Authority to appoint a virtual school head who is employed to make sure the council's duty to promote the education and achievement of its looked after children is properly discharged. The virtual school head should also be an educational advocate for children in care, provide advice and guidance to support parents of previously looked after children. The guidance provides a number of key questions for corporate parenting boards that they need to consider and ask those questions throughout the year as and when they're looking at the particular aspects of children looked after and how we are doing as a council. So turning to the Shropshire Corporate Parenting Board, that's chaired by Councillor Nick Bardsley at the moment and has been for some time. The terms of reference we reviewed in late 2019 and early 2020, and we refreshed the board with a set of subgroups established that we aim to enable some more targeted work streams to address a wider range of actions and addressing the needs of children and young people, and to ensure that progress in practice is led by all partners, not just children's social care. And this was revised in 2020 to reflect the best practice guidance. The impact of COVID has delayed some of the progress in relation to that in our corporate parenting board, because it's been very difficult to kind of get some of those subgroups off the ground, but it has continued to meet quarterly and the subgroups have all set priorities. The subgroups each report on progress against their own priorities at each of the corporate parenting boards. The membership and business, there is good attendance from members and officers. Virtual School has established a governing body which reports to the corporate parenting board now. Health partners and the Youth Justice Service are well represented on the board, and the Care Leavers Ambassador is a regular attender and it updates on the work of the Care Leavers Group and the Children in Care Council, and is represented by their support worker as well. Foster care representative is part of the stability subgroup and sits on the board, and has developed a foster care survey which is due to go out imminently.
Can I just tell members that the head of the virtual school is coming along to our panel to talk to us. We have a new, I've forgotten her name. That's it. And she's going to come along so you can have a chat and learn more about what the virtual school does. Okay, thank you. It's very important that our regulated services such as adoption, fostering, children's homes and placement services have a forum to ensure that their annual reports are scrutinised, and the annual reports for fostering and adoption have already been presented this year to Corporate Parenting Board. We are currently updating our corporate parenting strategy. That's in draft and it's due to be considered by Corporate Parenting Board in December. A report on the impact of COVID was submitted to Corporate Parenting Board in December 2020, and that clearly outlined the impact of COVID to foster carers, adopters, but also children's education, and the impact on things like attendance, vulnerability, and educational attainment. The Corporate Parenting Annual Report and the Virtual School Annual Report and the Independent Reviewing Officer's Annual Report are due in December to be scrutinised by Corporate Parenting Board. And performance data is considered at most of the key boards. The last set, the updated performance data wasn't ready for the last board. It didn't fit in with the timescales. So an updated performance report will be presented at December's Corporate Parenting Board. The role of our Corporate Parenting Board is focused on ensuring the voice of the child is heard and influences services development. We try to develop a culture of high support and high challenge to ensure effective undertaking of that corporate parenting responsibility, both within children's social care, across the Children's Services Directorate and across the partnership, ensuring that our colleagues like police, youth justice, health understand
that they have a corporate parenting responsibility is a clear role of the corporate parenting board. Holding each of those partners to account on behalf of the council so that each of those partners' contribution is held to account as part of the lives of our looked after children. Provides a clear line of sight on practice and what good practice looks like, and assures itself that it's delivered, including the role of the IRO, the independent reviewing officer, who have that independent oversight of the progression of children's plans and attainment and outcomes, and making sure that they are scrutinising children's plans effectively. The scrutiny and oversight of performance, outcomes and impact for children and young people of the work of local authority needs to be considered, and lead the culture and share the messages about corporate parenting responsibilities, and to lead the narrative that these are our children and good enough parenting that would be good enough for our own children is only what is good enough. So the subgroup
of the hardest drum to bang.
It is. He does it very well.
It does.
The voice of the child and young person is a subgroup on how we can best be the best corporate parents that we want to be. So we have two groups working with under 16s and our over 16s and care leavers, and try to work to ascertain their wishes and feelings as a group, but also how we can change and improve our services. But we also have Mind of My Own, which is an app that the social workers are able to utilise with children and young people to actually elicit their individual wishes and feelings as part of their own plans. And we're getting to a point whereby we'll now have enough data to be able to actually report on that more effectively. The Education and Outcomes and Impact subgroup is also the virtual school governing body. So those do the same two functions, and they also look at our post-16 children and young people. Health Needs and Outcomes is chaired by our looked after designated nurse from our colleagues in health, which is a really positive step forward, because it means that not all of these subgroups are now chaired and led by children's social care officers. They are supported by Nick in terms of asking for that contribution. They are chaired and supported by a range of officers across the partnership, as well as each one has its own member who supports her as well. Aspiration subgroup looks at the Care Leavers Covenant and improves outcomes for care leavers and aspires to improve those outcomes as well. Placement stability, so we have an overview of the outcomes for looked after children and care leavers. If children are in stable homes, nurturing homes, they are much more likely to improve their outcomes. And then the local offer for care leavers, once they leave our care, what is it as a council that we support them with as an offer for in relation to our ability to be their corporate parent until they're 25. Each subgroup has 3 or 4 measurable and clear priorities set out for it, and these are aligned within the practice priorities within children's social care. They focus on the child and young person at the centre and what will make the most difference and the impact for them, and each group reports to Corporate Parenting Steering Board, and it feeds into the Corporate Parenting Action Plan. The strength of our board is the commitment of the members who attend, the commitment of partners to looked after children, and the regular overview of performance data, the clear commitment to care leavers and supporting the local offer, and that the subgroups have work plans that address key priorities. The areas for development that we defined at the time when we restructured Corporate Parenting Board remain, because obviously COVID has had an impact on this. So how do we continue to strengthen the voice of the child and young person? How do we utilise the commitment of members to drive the corporate parenting responsibilities further, more, and be really aspirational about this? Ensure the challenge and evidence of holding to account the partnership for outcomes for children and looked after young people and care leavers. So where we don't have positive outcomes, for example, in relation to health, how can we push and drive that agenda forward? A really good example of that is that trying to get a scheme in place with our health colleagues about our care leavers being able to access free prescriptions post 18, and now our 18 and 19-year-olds are able to access free prescriptions if they need to. That's been driven by the Corporate Parenting Board and through that subgroup. Are we here in Shropshire the best possible corporate parent that we can be? How do we know, and what are we going to do to continue to be an even better corporate parent? Further strengthen the role of the governing body in schools engagement, particularly in relation to the post-16 offer of children and young people and the post-18 offer as well. Partner commitment to share the corporate parenting responsibility. So whilst system leaders within the partner agencies are very cited on the corporate parenting responsibility, that doesn't always falls down through to sort of a lot of the frontline staff in police, health, education, and we have to continue to work to promote that message. Focus on what do we know about our children and young people, how do we know it, and what are we going to do about it, and make sure that all of our action plan is better informed by the data and that that's particularly joined up, and that we evidence learning from quality assurance across the partnership. So Children's Social Care has an extremely strong quality assurance framework. We evidence our learning, and we evidence how we delegate that learning through to staff and show that we make progress against that. But what we'd really like to see is that quality assurance approach strengthened across the partnership and linked with the safeguarding partnership in relation to that as well. The structure of the board is that it meets every 12 weeks. The subgroups meet four weekly and drive the programme of work priorities. They are each led by an officer from the partnership and chaired by a member champion. The annual forward plan for each subgroup is for them to report on a deep dive on their progress reports. We haven't been able to progress that because of COVID, but that will be progress in the next 12 months. To have a 6-monthly focus on the outcomes of the quality assurance activity led by the independent reviewing officers, that was delayed by COVID. We need to get that in place in the next 6 months. And the annual meeting with Children in Care Council and Care Leavers Forum. It was a planned evening activity, a meal with the Corporate Parenting Board and young people, and that was delayed by COVID. And an annual meeting to focus on the success and outcomes of our children and young people with an extended invite to all partners. Again, that was delayed by COVID. So I'm sure Nick will want to contribute significantly to this, but the proposal for People's Overview Committee today is that we return to scrutiny in 6 months, and that from that point the Chair is able to present a report on the performance progress and any areas of concern that the Chair may have in relation to any of the areas of the subgroups that they cover. A report to be presented that evidences the virtual school and it's the subgroup progress against the priorities. That we report on the voice of how the voice of the young people has been heard and demonstrate their influence on service development, and we update in relation to the areas of development that have been defined, and that we demonstrate the activity and challenge of where the board has held the partnership to account, and we report on the achievements of children and young people. I'm happy to take questions, but I'm sure that Nick will want to contribute. Councillor Bartik.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And thank you, Sonia, for a very comprehensive report. We started the new board structure in March 2020. I think we had a meeting at the beginning of March, and then almost immediately the pandemic hit us. And bearing in mind the really very disruptive effect that had on the work of corporate parenting, you know, I must pay tribute to all the officers, and particularly Sonia and the lead officers on each of the subgroups, for an amazing amount of work that's managed to be done despite these problems. There's obviously a lot more that needs to be done, and Sonia's highlighted that. Can I pick up my personal thanks to councillors who got involved? Some of you are here in this room and have been involved for a very, very long time, and I will always be extremely grateful to you, Peggy, to Kevin behind me, and others who kind of stuck with us, because the original corporate parenting panel that Sonia picked up, shook up, was an entire new structure. It wasn't working as well as it should do, and Peggy and Kevin and others, you know, patiently sat through meetings which didn't really work terribly well. So very, very grateful to long-standing members, but also more recent additions on the member side. And I'm going to make the plea I always make. We always want more member involvement, A, because there's a lot of work that can be done, but also because it is one of the major responsibilities of us as councillors. And if I'm optimistic, I would say that 20% of our councillors have some knowledge, understanding, commitment to corporate parenting. I fear it may be a bit less than that. We need to expand member understanding, commitment and involvement in corporate parenting. And forgive me, those of you who have heard me say this a million times before, these are our children and we shouldn't treat them any differently from our own children, our own grandchildren, our nieces, our nephews, the children of friends. We should take that keen personal interest. And particularly with care leavers, we don't suddenly say to our youngsters when they start to become adults, that's it, get on with it, and never mind that you may get into trouble. We're there to give them that support, help, encouragement. Sometimes it's extremely difficult, and I know that from my personal experience. But we're there. Our corporate parenting responsibilities should provide that degree of support so that it isn't a cliff edge when people leave care. And one of the frustrations to me is not getting that philosophy, that culture across, that we continue to have responsibility for care leavers. Apologies, Chair, I tend to bang on about corporate parenting. Many of you are tired of hearing me say it, but it honestly does need saying. Thank you.
We'll get the message across one of these days. Anybody got any more questions? Councillor Pardy?
Thank you, Chair. First, thank you to Nick. He's always praising me. I'm not used to that. I usually get a bit of stick, but I think to follow on, a few years back, every councillor was asked to sign basically a promise to carry out their responsibilities as far as these children are concerned. We have new councillors, and I'm wondering if they've signed the promise yet. Also, I'm on the mental health subgroup of the parenting committee, and one of the problems we have there, we're moving on but very slowly. One of the problems we have is that what we're trying to do is get like a standardization so that everybody, every agency has the same information, so it's passed on, and you know, if we look at health passports and that, we all have access to them, and so obviously I ask Shropshire to continue to support this, and also the subgroup sometimes we have very poor attendance. I have to admit, a couple of times I haven't been there, but that's I've been on holiday or something. But it does seem to have poor attendance at the moment. So I ask again that Shropshire Council continues to attend these meetings and support the meetings. Thank you.
Councillor Hall?
Thank you, Chair. I don't know very much about the corporate parenting panel at all, actually, so that was a really helpful presentation. But just thinking about the current situation with the offer of COVID vaccinations for young people, how do the corporate parenting panel manage that potential dilemma between the council promoting vaccinations and the rights of young people?
Thank you very much for that good question. So it isn't particularly straightforward, as you can imagine. So if I start with the children's legal status, that's the easiest sort of starting point. So obviously the public health advice here in Shropshire, as it is anywhere, is to enable children and young people to access the vaccine, and we start from that starting point. If a child is on a full care order, then we go to them and we have the conversation with them individually. Their foster carers or their children's home have the conversation with them individually. If we deem them to be capable of making the decision themselves, then their wishes and feelings are taken on board. The vast majority of our older teenagers have said yes, they want access to the vaccine. If the child is something called Section 20, which means that their parents maintain parental responsibility, and they're in our care voluntarily at the request of their parents, then that conversation is had with their parents directly and they themselves with the child. So it's a very individualised decision based on the child's wishes and feelings, their own individual health needs, and obviously then a conversation with their parents is appropriate. Does that answer your question? There's no one blanket.
Yeah. Interested in that sort of thought process. Really.
Yeah. So primarily it'll be driven by the young person's wishes and feelings, and we will try and achieve the outcome that they say that they want to achieve.
Have many of the children been poorly, do we know?
We've had a few children who have had COVID, none of whom that I'm aware of have been seriously poorly. We've had staff that have been, but not children. And I think the take-up, we had a report to the last board, didn't we, on COVID vaccine? I think the take-up is quite positive in terms of our group of children and young people.
I think the young people are the ones that, you know, they want to have it. I know my granddaughter couldn't wait. The day she was 16, next day she was there. Any more questions? Sorry. I missed your hand, Kirsty.
I have. Hello, Peggy. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Sorry, the sound's really bad. I don't know if the others at home are feeling the same, so I do apologise. It's just to touch on virtual school, really. We've obviously got our new head teacher, Jo, in place, and we've had our first, I chair the governing body, and we've had our first meeting. We've set our visions. Very much, you know, it's looking at you know, the voice of the child, and even a new logo. They're designing it themselves. We've had an e-graphic designer in. We have now got an assistant head teacher in place, so that's really positive news. And it's just really looking at what the children need, how we support them, best outcomes, not the limitations, the possibilities. And thank you, Nick, for all you do. We recently attended a fantastic aspirations event which Holly had led on, Care Leaver ambassador, and a lot of work going on there about the aspirational fund. And hopefully when we do come back to scrutiny in 6 months, there's some real positives looking forward. So yeah, be some good stuff to report on, hopefully. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right.
Sorry, where to go?
I'm trying to get your attention. Just to acknowledge Councillor Barnes and Councillor Hardy's comments. Thank you very much for that. And to say that through the new member induction programme, we've run a series of corporate parenting sessions. It would be my recommendation as Executive Director of People is to run that again in the new year. Such an important element of a councillor's role that I do think we need to run that in the new year, so I'll take action on that. And secondly, the corporate parenting promise was sent out with members induction. I don't think we asked members to sign it, so we will follow up on that. I think it's a really, in fact, valid point to raise, so thank you.
Councillor Barnes.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. We did have one new recruit from amongst the new councillor intake. It would have been lovely to have had half a dozen. It has been extraordinarily difficult, I'm sorry to say, and I know I'm preaching to the converted here, to get members interested in corporate parenting. So thank you, Tanya. I think a fresh appeal would be great. I think those members who've come on have realised very quickly, actually, it is a hugely important task, but also very, very rewarding. It's been much more difficult over the last 18 months, of course. We haven't been able to attend, you know, we did have an absolutely fabulous summer party in Mill Village for a couple of years, but obviously we've not been able to do that. Hopefully next year we will be able to, and it's fabulous to come along, meet foster carers, meet some of the youngsters, and just have a great relaxed afternoon, and getting to know, and it reinforces that feeling. You know, these are not kids with horns and tails. These are our kids. There are fabulous ones, not so fabulous ones, like our own. You know, if we're honest, some of our kids can be an absolute pain in the whatever, and we shouldn't expect looked after children to be little angels. They're not, you know, they're just like other kids. So Yeah, good stuff.
Given the trauma, some of those children they've been through.
I was going to say, as defensive corporate parent, I would argue that all 571 of them are wonderful. What they are, the product of the parenting, the community, and the trauma. And what they do is they communicate that through negative behaviours. But if you that's what's wonderful about corporate parenting board, is that you do hear the stories, and you do hear about the young people that at one point were really struggling and the progress that they make. You know, we've got a young person who was really struggling 12 months ago, really having a very, very challenging, difficult time, couldn't settle within the home that he was in. He was moved, he's formed really good relationships. He spent most of COVID raising money for charity through learning how to cycle and swim, and did his first triathlon. Huge achievements for a young person with physical and learning needs, physical difficulties and learning needs. But actually, when you're in the right home and you're cared for and you're nurtured and you're respected and you feel that you're valued, children can make huge amounts of progress, no matter what their backgrounds and what their adversity is. So that's the joy of corporate parenting board, is that, you know, as Nick says, you hear about the difference that we actually make.
And we have to say a big thank you to our foster carers and grandparents.
Without a doubt. We've got about 180 connected family carers at the moment. It's about 180 families, because some of those have got 2, 3 and 4 children living with them, who support and care for extended children from their extended family. Without them, Shropshire, and financially, let alone anything else, would be in an incredibly different place without those extended family carers.
I think perhaps we need a session at a full council meeting.
Thanks, Peggy.
Chair. Hello.
Sorry.
I've got my hand up. Yeah, that's already been suggested. I've talked to our leader ahead of my report to full council. We'll send out the pledge for members again, and look, you know, just highlighting the 7 principles around this initiative. That will be going out to all members next year.
I think when it was at a council meeting, we all signed the pledge, wasn't it, some time ago? Yeah, so perhaps it's time to renew, and, you know.
That's what I've just said, Peggy. That we're going to redo that.
Yes, sorry, Dan.
Part of my report.
Carrying on, sorry, Kirsty.
Well, just, I think it was Christmas 2019, but it might have been, no, I think it was Christmas 2018.
Yes.
We had some of our care leavers going around while we had carols and mince pies and so on. And I mean, A, we got a very high pledge rate, and B, I think it was an eye-opener to a lot of our councillors that these were regular, you know, okay kids. They were not, you know, some sort of subspecies. And I think that psychological barrier is still there with a lot of councillors. And you know, there's a lot more we need to do, and I know Kirsty's totally committed to this, to getting the message across that all of us, not just the 15 or 20 of those who are involved with corporate parenting, have that responsibility. So, thank you, Chair.
Remember the concert we had in the nightclub?
Yeah.
That was fantastic. What they put the band they did. Remember, Ken?
Yes, it is.
What's it called, the nightclub? That's it. Yeah, we had a brilliant session there.
We all know that place.
This is not a negative, but there has been criticism about the amount of work social workers have to do, and whether or not we've got a full complement, and whether they're trained or not. What's the position at the moment with social workers?
So at the moment, I have 30 social work vacancies, the vast majority of which are covered by agency staff. So that's why in the quarterly budget report you see a significant overspend in relation to agency. We are about to embark on a national recruitment campaign to address that. It is a national issue, it is a national shortage issue. We've done a number of initiatives in relation to this year. We've employed 15 newly qualified social workers. Normally we employ 8 to 10. We've got year 3 of the 3rd cohort of apprentices coming through. So our first set of apprentices will graduate this time next year. That will help and support with the qualified workers. The challenge nationally is experienced social workers, 5 years plus, which obviously with the level of court work and such like, we need, you know, the experienced social workers as well as the incredibly talented newly qualified ones as well. So through COVID, I think we brought a paper to People Overview Committee probably about this time last year in relation to the impact of COVID. So with our permanent staff turnover has remained very low. For last year, it's 6.7%. It's one of the lowest in the West Midlands. But obviously, the agency staff turnover can be higher than that. So we've got a group of agency staff that have been with us for a very long time, and then you've got a kind of group that kind of change more frequently, and that does impact on sort of caseloads and transfers and the quality of children's social work, really. We had a period of time between January of this year and the end of April where caseloads were extremely high, and we undertook quite a lot of work around how to address that in terms of where the problems were, which points the system had the most problems, and the executive leadership team gave us the finances to be able to bring in a project team to address that. So we identified that it was our court hub that had the sort of greatest pressure at that moment in time, and that's been in place since the end of June now and has made a significant difference. In terms of caseload numbers, which in many ways doesn't mean very much, but in terms of caseload numbers, we're at a point whereby most social workers now have medium to approaching high as opposed to where we were, which is high and above. Some have low and really quite positive caseload numbers. It depends where in the sort of system they are. We do have an increase, as you know, in looked after children, and we've got a significant pinch point around some of those delays being completed, particularly through the court system. There have been various delays, you know, with the whole court process from end to start to finish. And that means that some children's plans aren't finishing the way as speedily as we would like them to, and therefore you can help them move on and out of the care system and therefore caseloads. So again, it's quite a complicated picture. We're certainly in a better position than we were sort of 6 months ago, 8 months ago, but we can always continue to improve on it, and that's what we're aiming to do. That side, even if you go to social worker caseload of 10, there's still too much workload to do. So, you know, I think that's the nature of the social work task as well. Yeah. And it's so dependent on your partner agencies. So as partner agencies have come back online and started to do much more face-to-face work, that's helping and that's impacting. And many of our social workers will tell you that if they've got children working with stepping stones, that's also really helpful.
It's had an impact as well on the fostering and adoption panels because girls haven't been able to get, you know, cases through to us quick enough. But that's we're having more fostering panels now to, you know, help catch up with that. I was going to ask you, you talked about the Mind of My Own, and I heard about it at one of the corporate parenting subgroups. But do you think it would be something that you could bring to panel to share with them? Is it at a stage or not?
I'd have to get the team that are leading on that to think about it. There's no reason why I don't think we couldn't do a demonstration and we can show some of the outcomes and some of the feedback. We can include that, yeah. We could include that in the 6-monthly update because then we'll have even more contributions, and therefore how we're using that data could be part of that.
Okay with everybody. I think it'd be, you know, the more you learn about how we operate as a council, it gives you more chance to ask the questions, isn't it, and to scrutinise it. So is that okay? So the pledge was sorted. Virtual head's coming very soon to us. And then more questions? Well, thank you. That was super. Will this be going out to all members?
Yes, well,
I think
no, I don't know if it's
gone out
to all members. It's gone out to committee.
Yeah.
But there's no reason why we couldn't send it out to all members as part of a kind of an education. Sorry. I'm just saying it's gone out to our committee this morning, but I can't see any reason why it wouldn't be useful information.
I was just thinking it would be a way in, and then Kirsty's going to follow it next year at council, you know, somewhere down the line, Nick, we'll make sure that everybody knows exactly what their job is. Yeah?
Absolutely.
Yeah, because I think it is. It's, you know, people just don't understand, you know, what's involved. That's just me, Nick, on our bandwagon. But thank you both very much. Thank you, Kirsty. Good to hear you're on board. So, from that, we're going to have, you're coming back to us in 6 months, and you're going to do a little thing on the mind of my own.
We'll include it in the whole,
yeah,
the whole thing.
Yeah, that'd be good. Anybody got any recommendations? Apart from we're coming back? Okay.
Just say big thank you to everybody, really.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
Staff and councillors.
It's a hard job. I remember, Kevin, when we went and did the focus group on the children's homes.
Yes.
That morning, they've got 2 children and nowhere for them to go, because it's just sheer volume of children coming in. You know, how on earth cope with it? Somebody's smiling, she knows exactly what I mean.
I think week 1, wasn't it, Tanya?
Yeah. Oh, it was just awful that morning. But, great. Right, work programme. You're asked to agree the proposed committee work programme. Anybody suggesting any changes and or recommending any other topics to consider?
I'm not recommending any changes or in addition to the next meeting, but I would like watch the documentary the other day. The position of children as carers in Shropshire, on where we are with that, and how we support those children. I have asked some years ago, and we did have a little bit about it, but how they're
That little
supported.
girl coming to look after mum and dad.
That's right. Yeah. That's a refresher, and also you can compare to when they did come last time.
I have to say, I'll blow the trumpet for Woolwich Rotary here. We're involved with young carers, and we frequently send some money across for them to have, you know, days out and that sort of thing, because we're conscious that, you know, these children don't get a chance to go anywhere. Okay?
Yep.
Okay. Date of next meeting is the 19th of January. Gosh.
Chair, you've got one very.
Oh, sorry. Hang on. Yes.
One while, I think at the last People's Overview Committee, you asked about large sibling groups and demographic data.
Yeah.
So we've looked into that, and the demographic projection is that we have got a higher number than regionally and nationally. But because that's only a projection, we've been advised to wait for the outcome of the census, which will actually confirm it. But my understanding is that the national figure for sort of large sibling groups is something like 0.1%, and we're at about 3%. So that's considerably kind of higher. But that's the projection. Once the census data is out, we'll be able to actually confirm whether that's the case. So this kind of gut feeling that we've got larger numbers of sibling groups than some other local authorities is part of our demographic projection at the moment.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, Councillor.
I'm just wondering, is it possible for us to have a scrutiny on mental health and the issues of mental health with children and also adults as well? That's not.
That comes under health group.
Yes.
Comes under something else.
Yeah.
Health.
Okay.
Yeah. But we do work alongside them, and there should be a report coming back, not from you. I went to a joint committee with Chelford, and that was all about mental health, and they challenged the CCG and the hospitals, and there should be a report coming back from that. But Daniel and I are going to go through all the minutes for the last 2 years and just look where things that we asked to come back, that we get them back. It might mean we have an extra meeting even online, but that's Daniel, that's what we want to do.
Yeah, because you know, mental health with our young people is definitely increasing, and it's quite a concern. So
yeah, we had a joint meeting with the Telford Scrutiny Board, but I had to go to it, and it's not a good result, and they're promising to improve. So we're waiting what they have improved.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Okay, everybody. Sorry, Nick.
Just an admin point, and lots of the publicity talks about the next meeting as the, you know, it is definitely the 19th of January, isn't it?
As far as I know.
Yeah, no, that's fine. No.
Why did you query?
I had another date.
Oh, right.
No,
Well,
that's fine.
we'll check.
Yeah,
We'll
no,
check.
that's fine.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. Safe journey home.
Thank you.
Thank you both. Three of you, sorry. This still out, I'll be in trouble.